This video is going to show you how to install Drupal 6. We're going to cover all the steps from downloading it, FTPing it up to the server, creating the database, and then running the install script. To start off, we're going to go to Drupal.org, and then we'll go to the Download tab. And from this screen, we want to select the Drupal project. Once on the Drupal project page, if you scroll down, you'll see all of the latest official versions for Drupal. You notice we have 6.0 RC2. Whenever you're watching this video, it may be 6.x something else, 1, 2, or 3. We're going to go ahead and download this and save it to our disk. I'm going to save it to my desktop, so I have it in a convenient place. It's easy for me to find. And now that I have the files, I'm going to go to my file browser on my computer. See, I'm in the desktop, and I'm going to unzip that package, and that will give me a directory named Drupal with all of the Drupal files in it. Now, when we go to put this onto our website, you can upload the GZ file and unzip it on the server if you're FTP client or if you have command line access to do that. Most often with FTP, though, you can't do that. So we'll be FTPing the files themselves that are in our Drupal folder. So one thing I want to point out right now, when looking at these list of files, I'm going to go turn a switch on in my file browser here to show hidden files. And you'll notice that a new file has appeared in our list. It's .htaccess. And normally files that begin with a dot are hidden on a lot of file systems. So it's easy to miss, but it's a very important file for Drupal to act the way you expect it to, particularly when it comes to clean URLs. So we just want to make sure we keep an eye on that file and make sure it does get copied over. Okay, so we have Drupal, and now we need to get it onto our server. And so I'm going to open up my FTP client here, and you'll notice over here is my local machine, and this is my server, so that's where my my host has my site available. And they will be going into the public HTML folder here. So on my desktop, here are the files that I want. So we want all of our Drupal files. I don't want the Drupal folder. I just want all the files because I just want to go to my domain name and have everything be there. I don't want to have to go to domain name / folder name. So I'm going to highlight all of the files within the folder and upload those to my server. This is going to take a couple of minutes. I've shortened it here for the video. But you'll see that everything's getting uploaded, and now I have all of my Drupal files in my public HTML directory, which is how it's set up on my server, for the root of my site. Now, remember the htaccess is hidden, so I'm going to turn on hidden files in my FTP client, and if we look at our file list of what's on the server, you'll notice I don't find the htaccess, and that's a problem. So what I need to do is go back over here to my local copy, make sure I highlight that, and make sure that that actually gets up onto the server. So now I have my htaccess file along with all my other Drupal files, and now I'm ready to proceed. Cool. So let's go to the browser and actually install this. So I'm going to go to my domain name where I've installed this, and I've got one set up, which is called drupaltest.org. So I'll put that in there, and this will bring me to the new Drupal 6 installer, which is much prettier. You also notice that we have an option to choose our language. We can do it in English or in other languages. We're just going to do this in English for this video. Now, the very first thing I get is an error. So we need to look at this error and figure out what we need to do. Basically, it's saying that it needs write permissions for the site's default folder. And because it didn't have that, it couldn't create the site's default files directory for us. So let's go take a look at that. The permissions that I need in order to write to the directories is on the server. So I'm going to go back to my FTP client and look at my my permissions from here. So we'll go into Sites and Default, and this is the folder that it's saying it needs to have access to. Now my FTP client, I just right click and do get info. Different clients will have different ways to do this, and it brings up the access, and then I can add the right access permissions to it and set those. Now when we go back to the browser and I reload the page, Drupal should be happy. So let's see what happens here. Yay! One thing to note, this yellow box here is not an error, that's just a notice, and that's something I know about that I have set up on my server. I have it set up to not give very much information about Apache, which is fine. So we can just ignore that little message for now. What we want to focus on here is the database information that we're going to need. Now, I don't have a database set up yet, so before we can proceed here, I've got to create my database. And I have phpMyAdmin set up on the server. So I'm going to log into phpMyAdmin with my ID. Now once I'm logged in, the first thing I want to do is actually create a database that we can use for this installation. So I'll go to create new database and I will type in Drupal test. That seems like a fitting name so that I know what database this is for. And once we've created the database, that's pretty simple. If we click on the privileges link, we're going to see that only admin and root have access to use this database. And they have global permissions. They can affect all my databases. And since we're going to be storing our username and password in a text file, I don't want to use either of those accounts. So I'm going to go to privileges on the main phpMyAdmin page, and I'm going to add a new user just for this database. Go down to add new user. I'll type in a username. Again, Drupal test sort of makes sense so that everything lines up and I know which users for what. Under host, we don't want any host. We'll put it on local host. That means people can't use the database from any location. They have to actually be located on my server. Just a little extra security. And then we'll type in a password that we need. And when we scroll down here, you're going to see that there's this section for global privileges. And I don't want this user to have global privileges. That means affecting any and all databases. I don't want that. So we're going to skip that. It's creating the user. Again, global privileges. I don't want that. Keep scrolling down. And then we have this section on database specific privileges, which is what I want. So from here, I can pick my database. And now this user has rights to just that one database and nothing else, which is the way I like it. And then we have this database specific privileges where we can now check all for this because we do want this user to be able to do anything to this database. So I'm just going to go ahead and do check all. It's to make it easy so I don't have to check all those boxes, and I'll hit go. And so now we've created the user and we've given that user privileges for this particular database and this database only. So now let's go back to our install page and we will go through the installation again. We can ignore that little notice there and fill in our database information. So the database name is the one we just created, which is Drupal test, and our username, same thing, and then we have the password. So you'll also notice that we have this advanced options down here, and this allows you to put in specific host or port information. Normally you don't need to use that unless your hosting service tells you to. Table prefix is pretty important, and basically this allows you to use one database to have multiple applications running so that the tables don't conflict, and you would basically add a prefix to all of the table names for Drupal so that it would be distinct from any others. So we don't need to do that because we have our own dedicated database here. So I will save my database information. It's running through everything it needs to, and bingo, here we go. Our installation is complete, and we have a notice that's telling us that it's now done writing to site's default, so we can change those write permissions just for a little extra security. So I'm going to go back to my FTP client, open that up, and what we can do is change the settings PHP, so it had two things it was telling us about, and just double check that, and that is read only. And I'm going to go back to my folder and change those settings and remove write access back to what it was originally, and we're done. So it's all safe and secure. Drupal's done doing what it needs to do. So now we get to look at the next cool feature about the new Drupal 6 installation is we get to fill in all of our information for the site here rather than having to do it as an extra step later. So it's taking the site name from my URL, which I don't really want. I'm going to put my own site name in here, which is my Drupal test. I'll put in an email address. This is the from address for the website. And we get to create the administrator account here. So I'll put in a username. And you'll notice that it automatically filled in my email address from above. I can switch it to another one. It's just trying to be helpful. And I'll set up a password. And we have this cool password strength checker. So you could see that it was checking to see how strong it was. And this is medium. That's good enough. It also checks if they match. So you can double check yourself real time to make sure that you've got a good password and that you've got matching passwords. So next is server settings. You'll notice it automatically picked my default time zone, and that does match the time I have on my local machine here. It went ahead and enabled clean URLs for me. It actually ran the test, checked it, and enabled it for me. This last section is really important, and this is checking for updates automatically. And what this does is it lets my site anonymously check in to see if it's running the latest code for both core and for contributed modules and themes. This is really important for security to make sure that I know when the latest secure releases have been put out. So I'm just going to save that, and now I have my installation complete. I go to my new site, and voila! You'll notice that the first step is to begin configuring the website. And in the past, this was always you had to create your admin account first, which was sort of annoying. So now that that's all been wrapped into the installer, we have a lot of our base stuff already done, and we're ready to go. So installing Drupal 6, fast and easy.